Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. May beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear it one time. The Bhagavan is dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks, community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice, the profound perfection of wisdom, beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, to the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage trained wish to practice the activity, the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra and his son lineage or daughter lineage wish to practice the activity, the profound perfection of wisdom, should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no touch, no taste, and no phenomenon. There is no element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, to reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it's not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayato Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train a profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then a Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. The praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions, and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages of achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Ah Rapatsanadi, with the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas, visualized before me, this mandala built on the base resplendent with flowers, saffron water and incense, adorned with Mount Meru with 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effect. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassionate form and the skies of your Dhamma Kama wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Gurus.
Thank you very much. I was just reflecting as Lou was reading, leading the prayers for us, that the requesting mandala is to the Guru. I added that in, not because I was thinking of myself, of course, but because I wanted to pay homage to my own precious teachers in my humble capacity presenting these classes. So just to emphasize the incredible value of requesting teachings from our teachers, the actual act of requesting is said to not only create the conditions for our precious teachers to remain with us and to continue to turn the wheel of Dharma, but also to create the karmic impulses to meet our precious teachers in future lives so that we can continue on the path. And so to creatively request teachings of one's teachers is a practice in its own right, a marvelous practice, and worthy of much sort of deep consideration. What teachings would you actually like to request? Who's frozen again, I think. He's all... So, and I just mentioned that because it's really very, very valuable. And often our teacher won't immediately agree to our request, but not to be phased whatsoever. In fact, that's often part of the ritual of requesting from the guru's side, is not to immediately say yes to everything, because they want to see clearly that it's from our side important and valuable to receive those teachings. And so when we request, they want to see that sincerity. So by rebuffing us and sending us away, we shouldn't feel somehow that we've failed in our request, but to delightfully re-request the same teaching at an appropriate time. And it's said that often traditionally the guru will hear those requests 3 times and then finally accede to our request. So of course it's also good to mobilize with others, other students, to create a kind of body. So for a group request, and then to make a request on that basis as well has a great persuasive value. So it's very wonderful to think of the dynamics of that, the fortune, in other words, of being able to receive and hear the precious teachings. Last week, I quoted from Shantideva's training anthology and his quotation from the Vajra Flag Sutra, as I was conscious, looking at the faces of you all, that the inventory of 27 mistaken conducts cut deeply, perhaps disturbingly so. I saw people sort of sinking lower and lower in their Dharma chairs. their lotus blossoms until they're almost submerged by the internal petals. So that feeling of dejection has to be looked at and tackled and recognized, of course, admitted. We have to admit that we do get dejected. So I started today's class preparation by working on that point, and then things just continue to unfold. So as I mentioned at the beginning, as I'm conscious this is the second last class of this sort of block, that I will just let things run. So why was Shantideva's enumeration of 27 modes of misconduct so disturbing? I thought that perhaps it's because we can see instantly how frequent they are in our own daily lives. They seem to erupt into our lives, even when we're conscientiously concerned to neither generate them nor fall under their sway, given that they have been generated. Somehow, they nonetheless get to rear their ugly heads and take control over us. Thus, we're left with a kind of puzzlement, which has been addressed, if you remember, very clearly by Shantideva in chapter 4, verses 28 and 29. Shantideva said, although enemies, such as hatred and craving, have neither any arms nor legs, and are neither courageous nor wise, how have I been used like a slave by them? 29. For while they dwell in my mind, at their pleasure they cause me harm. Yet I patiently endure them without any anger. But this is not an appropriate and this is an appropriate and shameful time for practice, for patience. Sorry, I'll say that again. For while they dwell within my mind, at their pleasure they'll cause me harm. Yet I patiently endure them without any anger. For this is an inappropriate and shameful time for patience. So patience here means a tolerance, and more particularly, a tolerance of what is actually intolerable. To allow mental afflictions to dwell in our mind unopposed, let alone not seek to circumvent the lines of action that might unfold from them through our three doors, is being powerfully depicted here by Shantideva in terms of being both inappropriate and shameful, because this is not the time, meaning right now, to acquiesce. Because when we do, we're offering ourselves up in effective terms to being a slave of the afflictions themselves, so that the mere non-responsiveness to working against them or creating a remedy is itself an enslavement. We're offering ourselves up on a platter to be taken advantage of by our own delusions, in other words. So the term slave here is Shantideva's own. So we're to ask, how have I been used like a slave by them? So to be a slave in this context means that we're no longer self-determining, because we've become passive vehicles carrying out the errands of the delusions themselves. And in an earlier class, if you recall, I referred to this as allowing ourselves to become obedient zombies of the afflictions, because we're offering no tangible or viable resistance. We might say that we're zombies because we're being mindless in these conditions. We're not applying our minds to remedy the situation. Thus, we're left to suffer the consequences alone. I emphasize alone. We are the ones who will inherit the consequences, while the afflictions themselves, if you like, get off scot-free. So they might even get to luxuriate in the safe haven afforded by our own bizarre acquiescence, our intolerable tolerance, which has allowed them this occupation. Of course, such a scenario is the precise, exact opposite of Dharma practice. As Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, that you are the creator can be seen from real experience. Putting a negative label, this is shameful or this is bad, is like pumping up a car's tires. This is bad, bad, bad. It gets pumped up more and more. Then, of course, anger arises together with the thought to hurt or harm. Even without meditating, you should watch your mind and be aware of what your mind can do. With mindfulness, there is much more freedom at such a time. Rinpoche continues, you can decide whether to practice patience or to get angry. Even if you still have ignorance, this is still the case. By looking at ordinary life, you can see that whether you have happiness or problems is totally dependent on what you do with your mind at each moment. Each moment's happiness, each moment's problem is totally to do with each moment's way of thinking. This is the reason, says Rinpoche, that Buddhism puts such emphasis on mindfulness. Without it, one cannot protect our mind that is habituated to the self-cherishing thoughts of ignorance, anger, and attachment from morning to night, from birth to death, from beginningless rebirth. You are like a father and a mother, and the mind is like my little baby, for which responsibility must be taken. These days, parents, if they are very busy, hire other people to watch the baby. But in my time, Rinpoche is reflecting here, in my time when I was a baby, if there was no one watching, even for just a 5-minute period, I would fall down the steps, do the wrong thing with my mouth, maybe putting a knife into it and damaging, and perhaps even killing myself. Clearly, there is an immediate danger in not watching a baby. You are in danger in exactly the same manner. If you don't constantly watch, guard, and protect your own mind. If you follow this self-cherishing thought, thinking, this is me, identifying the self-cherishing thought as me, considering it to be your very identity as what I am, and then what happens is that anger, pride, jealousy, and all the stuff of the negative emotions arises. But when you think the opposite, by letting go of the self-cherishing thought and cherishing others instead, these emotional negative thoughts do not arise. So you can see how what a extraordinarily rich and moving passage this is, and it really encapsulates not just the content of our current chapter, which it does perfectly, but the entire thrust of the Bodhisattva's way of life. This is what Shantideva is trying to get us to do from each and every angle as we proceed through this marvelous text. I thought just to mention very briefly the significance of Rinpoche's saying the identification of the problem that occurs when we identify ourselves not just with the self-cherishing attitude, but as the self-cherishing attitude. This is a major, major identity problem because we're not our self-cherishing attitude. We have attuned ourselves through repetition to a self-cherishing attitude, but we're not intrinsically that self-cherishing attitude. It has arisen due to causes and conditions, and these causes and conditions can be dismantled and undone. And so Rinpoche is also pointing out that the perfect foil or remedy is to swing the self-cherishing attitude around and turn it into the radical attitude of cherishing others. So in Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, Pabonka identifies or defines the self-cherishing attitude is our incapacity to surrender or sacrifice ourselves for others. So whatever holds us back from being able to reach out and work for others is the liminal point at which our self-cherishing attitude comes into play. So this is really quite extraordinary. So again, when we offer the mandala, of course, we're offering up the entire universe, but we're also offering up all the objects of our greed, ignorance, attachment, and so forth. We're offering up everything that we've clung to as precious, according to the self-cherishing attitude, in order to open ourselves to this vast prospect of generating a genuine cherishing others as more than ourselves spontaneously. This is really the essence of exchanging self and others as a mode of generating very, very powerful bodhicitta. So to step back a little, Rinpoche's very inspiring passage encourages us not to feel overwhelmed or even depressed at our apparent lack of effective mind training. Rather, we are to remind ourselves that all falls into place once we hold the great purpose, the aspirational bodhicitta mind, which involves totally overhauling and dissolving the self-cherishing thought that resides in the very depths of our hearts, serving, unless we oppose it, as the very core of everything we seek to do. In praise of this bodhicitta mind, the Kunu Lama says, and I quote some of these very beautiful passages because His Holiness the Dalai Lama often teaches on the Kunu Lama's praises because they are so beautiful and so moving. Bodhicitta, the seed of a Buddha, causes one to engage in beneficial thought and practice without discriminating the 6 kinds of wandering beings, place, time, or occasion. For raising your spirits when you are down, for removing arrogance when you are flushed with arrogance, nothing in the world compares with the non-deceiving friend of bodhicitta. However many examples there are of its benefit, though they may capture certain modes of meditation, they cannot bear comparison with a portion of amazing bodhicitta, even in a dream. Like gold that does not fluctuate, relative to prosperity and poverty, the supreme taste of bodhicitta puts even ambrosia to shame. The supreme thing to know is bodhicitta. The supreme thing to learn is bodhicitta. The supreme thing to practice is bodhicitta. The supreme thing to meditate on is bodhicitta. End of quote. Therefore, the gauntlet, if you like, has been thrown down, and it is up to us and no other to bend and pick up this jeweled glove and run with it, determined never to let it slip from our hand. Finally, we've heard the word bodhicitta, we've studied its meaning, we've studied its power, in effective terms, the advantages of it, and our capacity to generate it, inspired by the precious examples and the words, flawless words of the Buddha. So now is the time. If, on the other hand, we fail to do this, it's inevitable that we'll fall back to clinging to our self-cherishing attitude, and therefore be once again in the hands, the determining hands of the afflictions, rather than in the hands of our better self or our better mind, if you'll allow that expression in this context. This is why great inner resolve and courage is cared for. So inner resolve and courage here are the antidotes to despondency that thinks we're hopeless or overwhelmed by afflictions. We should think, as stated in the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, and as I quoted last week, now I should abandon neither the qualities of the Buddhas nor the great compassion that takes all sentient beings as its objects. So just emphasize there, now I should abandon neither. Now is the time not to abandon taking our next step on the path, because we think it might be too difficult or too hard in some way. So this determination, this resolve not to abandon the mind of bodhicitta or let it weaken in any respect, should stand unshakably, even when we're facing mortal threats to our own life, or even especially when we are. This is how vital should be our holding on to the preciousness of this mind. Nothing can shake us from it. So as I was sort of thinking about these points, I recollected the very moving accounts of Ribu Rinpoche, one of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche's own teachers, who was imprisoned in the labor camps in Tibet, often in solitary confinement, and there was subjected to relentless interrogation and torture during 35 infamous struggle sessions. So Ribu Rinpoche thanked his captors for the kindness they had shown him in enabling him to meditate on overcoming the self-cherishing attitude and cherishing others. This for him was a unique Dharma practice opportunity, unparalleled, and for that he was grateful to his otherwise presumed enemies. So this is really a remarkable example of how radical this perspective is. It's not something we condone an action of an oppressor, for example, but that it's how we respond to that situation that is so crucial. So Ribu Rinpoche showed no malice, and he never lost sight of his deepest wish to set everyone free by helping them awaken to their potential of enlightenment. So in this way, by applying the thought transformation techniques that have been taught by Shantideva in his great text, which we're currently looking at, we can actually see how to utilize those negative moments to generate an even greater, even stronger altruistic mind. So I'm referring here to the Lojong thought transformation tradition. This is the extraordinary task and prospect that Shantideva is laying out for us. And it becomes coherent and finally radically simple in the light of bodhicitta itself. as it takes root and blossoms within our own minds. As Akunu Lama says, quoting verse 39, if you wish to proceed easily to the level of the knowledge of all modes of meditation, what other method is there if you do not rely upon the bodhicitta of the victor's children? So this is what I meant by bodhicitta's simplifying potency. We recognize it, we have to recognize it as the supreme method. It is the method upon which we can full-heartedly, without reservation, dedicate ourselves to and rely upon. This dissolves all those other quandaries for us. If we really can look at it in this way, everything else will fall into place. This is especially the case as generating the mind of bodhicitta necessarily involves our development of wisdom, as we cannot fully unfold our spiritual potential without it. This is because, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains, all self-cherishing thoughts, just getting back to our earlier point, all self-cherishing thoughts, all emotional afflictions spring from ignorance. They don't primordially spring from us. This is a great letting ourselves off the hook here. Just think about it for a moment. If we can trace back the core of all our mistaken and sort of injurious views, harmful views and so forth, not back to some fundamental flaw belonging to us as a kind of crack in our vase, but to a cause that is located within us because it hasn't been resisted or overcome through applying its antidote, then we suddenly have a whole new way of proceeding forward, because it means we don't have to completely overhaul our psychology, our self-identification. What we do need to do, though, is to zero in on how to overcome this ignorance. So His Holiness says, the generally accepted understanding of afflictions is that they possess distinct objects of focus and disturb the minds in distinct ways. Attachment, for example, exaggerates positive qualities, while aversion exaggerates negative qualities. In the Prasangika system, however, all afflictions involve, in their mode of apprehension, an element of grasping at inherent existence. So, all afflictions involve, in their mode of apprehension, an element of grasping at inherent existence. His Holiness continues, when attachment, aversion, pride, or some other mental state, what makes them afflictions is not their distinct character, but this common denominator of grasping at inherent existence when apprehending its objects. In brief, the gross levels of afflictions arise from having delusions grasping at inherent existence as the cause, while the subtle level of afflictions arises when a mental state is conjoined with delusion grasping at inherent existence. So herein lies the essential need to realize emptiness. Our minds are uncontrolled because of ignorance, the mistaken belief in the reality of things. His Holiness says, to help others, it is not sufficient to wish to do so, merely wish to do so. Indeed, altruistic thoughts can become an obsession and increase our anxiety. When such good and positive thoughts are combined with wisdom, We know how to help beings effectively and can actually do so. The Buddha, overwhelmed by compassion, saw how beings suffer, and knowing that the cause of their suffering was the turbulence of their own minds, he knew how to help them. He knew that their minds were uncontrolled ultimately because of ignorance. Ultimately, and means finally, in the last resort, that is the reason, ignorance. The mistaken belief in the reality of things. He knew too how to counteract this with the wisdom of emptiness. His Holiness continues, for a Buddha is one who knows how to help beings by showing them what they should do and what they should avoid. And above all, who reveals to them the wisdom of realizing emptiness. End of quote. So this is something we should really take to heart, our need to generate realization of the reality of things, how they actually exist. Put another way, the method aspect of the path is insufficient on its own. We need both conventional and ultimate bodhicitta in order not just to fly at all, but to successfully fly all the way to full enlightenment. So without working at uprooting our disturbing conceptions from their root, by generating a direct realization of emptiness, we will be unable to fulfill our bodhisattva goal. As Shantideva says in his self-commentary to Entering the Middle Way, if you wish to proceed easily to the level of the knowledge of all modes of meditation, what other method is there? If you do not rely upon the bodhicitta of the victor's children. And Tsongkhapa, in illuminating the intent, quotes Nagarjuna from Nagarjuna's Compendium of Sutras on this very point. He says, O Bodhisattva, do not apply yourself to the profound nature of things divorced from skillful means. For joining method and wisdom into a union, is the perfect practice of bodhisattvas. So quoting now from Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas of reasoning, Tsongkhapa indicates why wisdom is indispensable. And the quote is, in those whose mind possesses a locus, why would the grave poison of afflictions not arise? So I'll read that again. In those whose minds possess a locus, sort of a location, a place to dwell, why would the grave poison of afflictions not arise? So taking this back to our earlier topic, we should be surprised that we're not afflicted all the time, rather than we're afflicted at all, if we have this locus for their arisal within our own continuums. So the locus here is none other than innate grasping at the inherent existence of persons and things. The meaning, as Tsongkhapa explains, is when one habitually sees that nothing, neither the one who feels nor the feelings themselves, have intrinsic existence, craving will come to an end. He continues, these lines also indicate that if one lacks such a path, there is no reason why all craving would come to an end. End of quote. So therefore, it is the wondrous and marvelous case that when and only when we realize emptiness with a valid cognizer, that the power of the afflictions will naturally dwindle and fall away. We can speak about this later in today's class, as a nearby forthcoming verse of Shantideva's is going to directly invoke this topic. But I just want to say a few words about the need for the elimination of self-grasping and self-cherishing in an integrated fashion. We're working on both simultaneously, if you like. His Holiness frequently explains how we can approach the elimination of the self-cherishing attitude together with the elimination of the self-grasping attitude. He says, every morning when I wake up, I remind myself that I'm just one human being among many, and that we're all the same. Rather than think of others in terms of us and them, I find it helpful to generate bodhicitta, the awakening mind, the aspiration to attain enlightenment for all sentient beings. I reflect on passages from the work of the Indian master Shantideva that make clear that at the root of many of our problems is an excessive focus upon ourselves. Good things are rooted in being more orientated towards the welfare of others. Shantideva states, this is His Holiness quoting Shantideva, all those who suffer in the world do so because of their desire for their own happiness. All those happy in the world are so because of their desire for the happiness of others. So His Holiness continues, if we focus too much on ourselves, we're not happy even in this life. Whereas to concern ourselves with the well-being of others is the gateway to great joy. If we're really serious about happiness in the long term, we need to open our hearts and focus on others as well as ourselves. I find this very meaningful. His Holiness continues, if we dig deeper into the psychology of this, we find that fear, stress, anxiety, and suspicion come about when we are disproportionately focused upon ourselves. If we are able to open up to some space for courage in relation to others, we can be more relaxed. So, in Buddhism, there is an emphasis on cultivating an altruistic attitude to opening up to the awakening mind. We combine this with a more philosophical view that incorporates a sense of interdependence and connectedness with others. And this is where the emptiness topic is swung right into central focus. His Holiness now says, this idea of interdependence is rooted in the Madhyamika view of dependent arising, the rejection of an independent objective reality out there. By helping others, we help ourselves. Our well-being is intertwined with the well-being of others. If we reflect on this in our own minds, it really makes a difference. End of quote. So this notion of opening up to the awakening mind is itself an unbelievably precious thought. It is an amazing prospect. Delving a little further, you can see how His Holiness not only indicates how our well-being is intertwined with the well-being of others, but also how the Madhyamika view of dependent arising, involving a total rejection or repudiation of an independent objective reality out there, is also inextricably intertwined with our altruistic attitude, while also spelling out the possibility of its development and perfection. We can best perhaps understand this subtle point if we consider its polar antithesis. That, this is sort of hypothetical, just a thought exercise. My well-being has nothing whatsoever to do with others. As I exist in an objectively existent way, a solipsistic vacuum, as it were, devoid of any association whatsoever with or reliance upon any sentient beings, let alone any environment, conditions, provisions, time, change, circumstances, etc. Likewise, if persons and things were not empty, there would be no point or purpose to altruism, because I would see no reason to work for the benefit of others. Indeed, there'd be no possibility of even doing so, as they would also already exist in the way they already do, immaculately sealed in their primordial self-existent condition, without any relationship whatsoever to anything that might happen or be done to them or for them. They'll be absolutely sealed, cut off, impervious. They would have neither reliance upon me nor me upon them. So if we were inherently existent, and they were inherently existent, we would be internally intact and self-presenting without any reliance on any factors, any causes and conditions. And these would include social relations. We couldn't even talk of them, let alone have them. As Nagarjuna famously says in the fundamental stanzas on wisdom, if all this is empty, then there is no arising or passing away. By the relinquishing or ceasing of what does one wish nirvana to arise? If all this is non-empty, then there is no arising or passing away. I wrote the same verse twice there. Unrelinquished, unattained, unannihilated, not permanent, unarisen, unceased. This is how nirvana is described. So in relation to these verses, Tsongkhapa says, suppose all the internal and external phenomena were not empty of inherent existence. For something that exists essentially, it is not possible for it to arise anew, because having been non-existent previously, and it is impossible for it to cease anew, having been previously existent. Therefore, it would not make any sense to maintain that nirvana arises from the abandonment of the afflictions and the cessation of the aggregates. This is because essentially existent afflictions and aggregates could not be eliminated, because such essence is immutable. End of quote. So if such things were immutable, there would be no path, no enlightenment, no liberation. These would have no feasibility whatsoever. Nagarjuna stated that things can only function, only have agency, because they are empty of existing from their own side. Nagarjuna says, for if emptiness itself is rejected, no functions will remain. There would be uninitiated actions, and there would be actions with agents without actions. There would be agents without actions. If there is intrinsic existence, the whole world would be non-arising, non-disintegrating, and will last for all eternity, devoid of varying states. So just allow ourselves to feel the impact for a moment to this reference of the whole world lasting for an eternity if there was inherent existence. It's sort of unimaginable. The whole thing would seize up totally. We and all things would be devoid of varying states because no functionality would or could remain or be present. It could never arise. It could never function. And how can we have a function without a function? This is the logical dilemma, the crazy consequence that affirming things to exist inherently entails. So we're sort of running out to the end of that line of thinking to find out the full impact of the problem of holding things to be inherently existent, and therefore spelling out the advantages of seeing them in the exact opposite way. So my point in introducing today's presentation somewhat extensively in this very deliberate way is to emphasize that we cannot really comprehend our current predicament nor fathom a means for transforming it unless we seek to engage not just in the conventional mind training, but in a mind generation of wisdom realizing emptiness. So much swings on this unless we develop. Nor can we fathom the nature of our debt to others, and hence endeavour to help and rescue them without exception from suffering and lead them to happiness. In the immediate terms of our Bodhisattva practice, or our aspirational Bodhisattva practice, how could we even reasonably expect to develop the fundamental reasoning involved in the logic of exchanging self and others as a supreme method for generating bodhicitta as taught by Shantideva in the 8th chapter? Kabje Zopa Rinpoche forcefully spells out this problem. He also draws our attention to the role of logic in determining the final mode of reality. So I quote, "An example of how things usually exist is to consider how our labeling functions from the side of our perspective. By pointing to this person, I then label other beings as separate. I call you other in relation to this I. Now, if this I truly existed as it appears to the wrong concept grasping at an inherently existent I, it would mean that it would exist completely from its own side. It would be independent. It would not depend on the mind. Likewise, if the other was truly existent, it would exist as other independently of mind. This is because it would exist completely from its own side." So Rinpoche continues, "Now follow this carefully. If this was true, and from the perspective of others, you would also be independently and truly existent other. Then you would have to see yourself as other also." This Rinpoche is spelling out the problems. If other and self were inherently existent, we run into these problems. I'm other to you from your perspective of your I, and you're other to me from the perspective of my I. But if I existed as other inherently, I would be other to me, etc., etc. There could be no change to that status because it's unrelated to anything else. But this is not how it happens, says Rinpoche. You label yourself I, and in dependence on this label, others are labeled other. Now you can see how the I and the other exist by being merely imputed by the mind, depending on the base. And the mind merely imputed the existence of I and other. This is all that the I and the other are. This is how the I and other exist and function. There is no I and no other more than that existing. Now you can see that the I is empty and the other is empty from its own side. But at the same time, it is a dependent arising, merely imputed by the mind on the base. End of quote. So Tsongkhapa elaborates how such an intertwined and distorted awareness of self and other, one that clings to them as inherently existent, causes all faults, as does Pabonka Rinpoche, who illustratively quotes from the commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognition. So I quote, "When there's a self, there's awareness of other. Dividing between them brings grasping and anger. Closely connected with those two, all the faults come into being." So we're still dealing with that initial topic that was raised at the beginning of the class, you'll notice. So if you want an expansion of this point, we can refer to Lama Tsongkhapa's Middle Length Lam Rim on page 117, where he elaborates. Later in the same text, while discussing the method of exchanging self and others, Tsongkhapa writes, "A continuum and a collection are designated on many instants and a combination of many parts. They lack an autonomous entity. Since your own self and the self of others must be posited on a continuum or a collection, they are not established by way of their own entities, which would not be merely self and others posited in relation." End of quote. Page 148, if people wanted to look that up. So in this profound way, we come to the astonishing realization that yes, it is actually possible to exchange self and others. We don't mean here that we magically get to swap bodies and minds with someone else, because sometimes we hear this. It's a misunderstanding, a kind of body swap or mind swap, literally. But what it does mean is that we view others as more important than ourselves, and we dedicate all our energies and activities towards enhancing and supporting their welfare. Moreover, we can and do this without the slightest concern for our own well-being. Why? Because we've eliminated self-cherishing, or are on the way to doing so. And this capacity is incumbent on first realizing that self-grasping at the self as inherently existent, as findable under analysis, when sought, cannot in the slightest be found, be established. This doesn't mean that the I doesn't exist or the other doesn't exist. Rather, as Rinpoche was so clearly putting forward, it exists as a mere imputation by mind upon the base. And returning to His Holiness's earlier quote, because I is merely imputed, it is dependently arising and therefore inextricably intertwined with others. So this is how we're weaving the conventional and ultimate bodhicitta together immaculately towards the same wonderful goals. So the presentation of the I as merely imputed and therefore existing as a mere I is to be understood as a unique position of the Prasangika. So it's the one that's been put forward by Shantideva, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Tsongkhapa, Chandrakirti, Aryadeva, Buddha Palata, and so forth. His Holiness says, only the Prasangikas negate the inherently existent I. The other Buddhist schools proclaim that the I must have some inherent existence from its own side, because if it didn't, it would only be an arbitrary name. There must, according to their view, there must be some objective nature or essence that allows us to have a sense of identity as the doer of actions and as the experiencer of results. His Holiness continues, the Prasangika, however, refute even this, saying the I exists merely nominally. So we'll have opportunity to pick up the thread of this discussion later, as we must, when we arrive at verse 57, which concerns the fundamental need to realize ourselves as illusion-like, if we are to actually oppose and conquer the afflictions with which we have since time immemorial been so consistently acquainted. Indeed, according to Gyaltsab Sabje's outline, this need to see ourselves as illusion-like and act on that basis constitutes the common antidote to the demon of the afflictions, meaning each and every one of them is antidoted by this single remedy. So I'll quote the verse here in anticipation, 57. In doing that which by nature is not unwholesome, for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I should always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. End of quote. So this would be the perfect final answer to any lingering qualms hanging over from last week that might hold that the task of overcoming the afflictions, the emotional afflictions, is hopeless because they seem to be endlessly supplied, and their capacity to arise, even with so little cause or stimulation, so remarkably large. If we can manage to, I'll leave this bit. So in the blazing light of this realization, our tiny personal ego dilemmas, seemingly so colossal and so all-important, are melted away. So what we cling to is being underscored by a misconceived notion of how we exist. And so if we can uproot the misconception, we no longer have the same need to be tenaciously holding on to this one in the face or against the face of the world, which means rejecting and embracing others according to some whim of our own device. All that stuff just drops away, and we're able to see everything in a vast, open, lucid awareness, which is wise and compassionate and spontaneously able to act for the welfare of others, because it's absolutely clear-sighted and unbiased. This is a remarkable idea, an aspiration. So returning now to where we left off at the end of the last session, where we find ourselves having arrived at a new main section heading, which is protecting the training of the mind from degeneration. This is subdivided into three: protecting the mind with individual antidotes, the common antidotes, the way of training in meditating on the antidote, and so returning to the first, protecting with the individual antidotes, we have two subheadings: protecting the training of the body from degeneration. And you'll notice that Shantideva is still engaged in offering instructions on how to protect the three doors from degeneration. So earlier we had two divisions: protecting the body from degeneration, protecting the mind from degeneration. So with verse 55, we commence exploring how to protect the training of the mind, not just the body, from degeneration. And that verse reads, being very resolute and faithful, steady, respectful, polite, with a sense of shame, apprehension, and peaceful, I should strive to make others happy. Now, this heading is also covering the next verse, 56. I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another. I should know them to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore be kind towards them. I can't help but remember Jay's question several weeks ago about how to deal with the really difficult protagonists in the world who are causing so much misery and mayhem. So this is really a clue to the answer, isn't it? I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another, battling away. I should know them to arise in their minds, the discords, due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore be kind towards them. So this is expressing the kind of embracing tolerance that I mentioned in relation to Ribu Rinpoche's response to his time in prison. All these attributes, being resolute and faithful, etc., are to be cultivated as an integrated set in order that we can effectively and efficiently strive to make others happy, which is our primary aim. Gyaltsab Sabje's commentary is as follows. If one were to ask, how does one protect the mind? The answer, strongly ascertain the points of advice by abandoning doubt and wrong consciousness with regards to them. Generate strong faith through belief in the three jewels and the points of advice, faith and aspiration, stable intent and practice, being polite by being respectful and humble with everybody, shame that is fearful of negativity by reason of oneself, being afraid of the ripened results by contemplating the shortcomings, having pacified senses and striving for the purpose of making others happy. End of quote. So before considering these recommended qualities, this list of recommended qualities in a little bit more detail, let's just briefly look at the meaning of protecting the mind in our current case. In his commentary, Geshe Doga indicates that protecting the mind necessarily involves quelling the powerful distractions that arise from pursuing the objects of our five senses in an unstructured and even careless and usually desirous, craving fashion. In other words, protection here, as mentioned by Gyaltsab Subje, also involves generating a capacity for suitable restraint. This involves sensual restraint. We're using sensual restraint here in a particular way. That means we don't just run out uncontrollably after whatever object of the senses is happening to manifest before us at that moment in time. And this is a sort of TikTok syndrome, isn't it? Oh, bang, oh, what, bang, oh, that can go on for, but kids get locked into this syndrome for hours and don't even look up. They don't even look to eat. They forget. There have been stories about some of the gamers sort of starving to death in their chairs because they're so hooked into the stimulation of the game. This is really a kind of metaphor for a problem we all have at various levels. We must be resolute in this aim. Why? Because we wish to remain faithful to pursuit of what is entailed in the points of advice, namely the points of advice concerning our Dharma practice. This is what distraction means. It's not that we're trying to so much vilify or turn those things into rubbish. It's just that if we do allow ourselves to run after them, there's going to be very little left over, unfortunately, to apply to much more constructive and productive ends. So to best approach the situation, we need to particularize our antidotes, tailor them for the actual situations in which we find ourselves becoming powerfully distracted in. This is the case. That this is the case is clearly indicated by the individual heading for this verse and the next verse, which is protecting with individual antidotes. Individual antidotes in this immediate context indicate that our remedies for various potential degenerations must be tailored for the specific avenue or pathway that leads to such deterioration. An example will make this clear. This example that Geshe Doga explains. He says, again, protection means being able to hold your mind, withdraw your mind from the engagement with objects as soon as we notice a distraction occurs. Protection is really important for us because we are so easily influenced by our senses. Our eye sense sees a beautiful object and then generates grasping towards it. We don't even notice that happening, do we? We find ourselves grasping the object almost seems straight away. It's compulsive. It is this grasping at beautiful objects that causes the attachment to increase in our mind. That in turn can cause the sense of wanting to own or to possess the object. And if one is not able to possess it, it distresses the mind due to strong grasping. So it works both ways. If we get it, we're distressed. If we don't get it, we're distressed. If we don't have anything to get stressed about, we're distressed. We manage to be distressed much of the time. Geshe Doga says, as the term suggests, grasping is holding onto and not being able to let go of certain objects, whether they be objects of attachment or objects of anger. So it works both ways. When we come into contact with certain objects, we immediately grasp onto them and don't let go, which causes the delusions in our mind to become intense and strong. Whether it is our eye sense or other senses that come into contact with the objects of distractions, if we protect our mind by not interacting with them, then the delusion and its consequences will not arise strongly and affect us in a negative way. So we must sever the connection with that object. This is the key. Sever the connection with that object. While this specifically applies in our meditation session, it also relates to our everyday life. So that's really, really valuable advice. So we're now really positioned to return to the examination of the individual factors that will support our ability to apply the prerequisite antidotes. So being very resolute and faithful involves clearly and convincingly ascertaining and thus being able to take upon ourselves the points of advice. We can't do that unless we understand the advice. We need to put that effort into unraveling the meaning of what we're hearing and then working out how we can apply it to ourselves. And in particular, these points of advice refer to the vows and commitments we have undertaken, specifically in this case, our bodhicitta commitment, also our refuge commitment for that matter, and it might also be our tantric commitments and other kinds. So it seems almost like a too obvious point to make, but we must ask ourselves, have we actually already taken the necessary steps to protect our minds and thus our practice in this very specifically pointed or targeted way? As Subjay is indicating, just having faith alone is not enough. It must be fully informed. It must be intelligent faith. I remember Geshe Dawa, one of my teachers in 1983, asking what kind of faith did I have in the Buddha. And I was a new student and was way out of my depth. And I tried to explain what it was that I felt was faith. And I remember very clearly that Geshe Dawa drew out this very distinction. And he said that some people have faith based on hearsay and even social pressure, social mores. You believe in something because your culture does, therefore you're faithful to that object of belief. Or, he said, you can have intelligent faith. And intelligent faith here means that we know why we believe in something. We know why we choose to adopt something. We know why we choose to reject something. And Geshe Dawa added that this kind of faith is unshakable because it's been grounded on something much more secure than temporary social conditions. So he actually mentioned the Tibetan people here, and it wasn't a criticism, but he said, many, many Tibetans are full of faith, but it's not necessarily a faith that is grounded in reasoning and understanding in this way. So it wasn't a criticism because a Tibetan growing up in a village, in a distant place, might not have the opportunity of doing detailed Buddhist studies with a teacher, for example. And it's extraordinary how powerful and wonderful their faith is. I always like when I'm visiting India to go to in Dharamsala in the local town there, there's a stupa, a village stupa really, and the old people in the town go to the stupa to circumambulate, and then they sit to chat with one another on the benches. And I always go to share that time with them because it's the most beautiful example for me of faith. They are so deeply invested in their bodhicitta motivations and so forth that to circumambulate a stupa is the main goal of the day, and they choose to do it with their village friends and share it in this way. And that is at the heart of their village life. How wonderful that is. So we're not in any way criticizing that kind of faith, but we're trying to say that in our case, we need to work on generating a faith that is incredibly robust and reasoned. Resolute means, according to Kunzang Pelden, whatever practice we perform must be accompanied by our great certainty as to what it consists of. So we don't just take it on board because we've heard it. Sometimes I've heard the lamas use a rather shocking analogy. They say we shouldn't consume the Dharma like a dog consumes a lump of meat. It goes, it's down. No, we investigate, we nibble, we only take a big bite when we know it's safe to eat, etc., so that when we do agree to integrate with it, we know exactly what it is that we've just eaten. That is an intelligent way to proceed. And it means that our resolution is unwavering. Obviously, this means that we must be able to comprehend and appreciate the initial, the middle, and the concluding phases of our practices, not in academic terms, but in staged experiential terms. We need to know what comes first, what will come next, what will follow, and we build on our unfolding experience in this articulated way with certainty because we know what to expect. So our lamas, for example, say it's very, very difficult to overcome the self-cherishing attitude because it's ingrained so deeply in our habitual behavior. So they're telling us that for a reason, because otherwise we're going to think I'm going to have no self-cherishing tomorrow because I don't like it. I want to go away. It's not going to work like that. It's still going to be there. So this is realistic, and it gives us the next foundation to take the next step, recognizing the degree of difficulty involved. We rise up with that commitment. Yes, we're going to actually work on it at that level, at that time. If we don't understand these staggered progressive terms of how our experience will unfold, we'll invariably hesitate, if not falter or balk in our approach. This is because we lack certainty, and without certainty, how can we prove to be resolute and faithful to the intent of those various practices? Indeed, we're not even well positioned to pay lip service to them. So faith, as Geshe Jumpa Getso indicates, is also the belief that if we practice the instructions exactly as taught by the Buddha, it is certain that we will progressively come to be the Sangha jewel and gradually the Buddha jewel, and ourselves therefore wanting to do that. So we have absolute faith in the Buddha's words in this respect. Steady, respectful, and polite. Steadiness can be distilled from the above explanation because we've been suitably and successfully, we've skillfully and successfully applied ascertaining what's involved in the practice, and therefore we know how to rely on it. We can prove to be steady in our approach because we're perfectly honed in our application. Steadiness is therefore a sign that confusion and nervous or intellectual vacillation has been vanquished. Do any of us here have intellectual vacillation? It's a particular problem. Some people spend, I think, at least a lifetime in it. But we often have patches of vacillation. We think, and off we go. It completely diffuses our ability to act coherently. So steadiness means that we have vanquished such vacillation. And such vacillation is predicated on the fact that we have remained or allowed ourselves to remain undecided about what it is we're doing. We haven't actually decided to do it. Therefore, we're vacillating. It's interesting, isn't it? We don't know where to take our next step because we don't know exactly what our next step should be. This is vacillation. Respect, I think, is a lot more transparent. It's respect to others. We honor them as holders of the Buddha nature, just as we are holders of our Buddha nature. We share exactly the same needs and are endowed with exactly the same potential. The line of reasoning here follows that of the famous verse 91 in chapter 8. Although there are many different parts and aspects, such as the hands, as a body that is to be protected, they are one. Likewise, all the different sentient beings in their pleasure and their pain have a wish to be happy that is the same as mine. So the logic here, Shantideva's logic, just as we respect our arm because it is an integral part of our body, and therefore most responsibly, most sensibly protect it from harm. Someone's about to hit it with a hammer, for example, because in so doing, we'll protect our whole body. Likewise, we should respect all the different other beings who are exactly alike us in wanting happiness and freedom from suffering. In this sense, we're all integral parts of the same body, the same social corpus, if you like. And thus, each and every one of us is equally worthy of respect, protection, and care. So, as you'll see, this sentiment reoccurs in the very next verse. Polite refers to our spiritual decorum, which takes the uncontrived form of being respectful and humble with everybody. I like the everybody bit of that. That's the hard part. Being humble and respectful to everybody. Again, this will be securely grounded upon a fundamental realization of the equality of self and others. It is only on the basis of always overweening self-cherishing that we would generate pride, conceit, the wish to exploit others and lord it over them, even treating them as dominions worthy only of relentless exploitation, etc. How well this describes so many antics of the world, or rather the worldly. The qualities with a sense of shame, apprehension, and peace. We have tackled the meaning of shame previously. We are to generate from within oneself a sense of personal shame if we fail to observe those trainings or even corrupt them, together with a sense of fearing the opprobrium of others if we fall down or over in this way. Thus, apprehension here refers to our awareness of what happens if, due to a lack of shame and other contributing factors, we do violate and transgress our vows and commitments. Peaceful is a shorthand way of describing the calmness and happiness that naturally occur when we do manage to pacify the clambering, craving, grasping of our senses. Endowed with such happiness and peacefulness, we are ideally suited to consider the plight of others who are tormented by suffering. So we remember here Shantideva's famous verse in chapter 1, 28, although this is frequently quoted, this verse, although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness, like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. Verse 55 concludes with the overall purpose of employing all these qualities. It is so that we can successfully strive to make others happy. This is our singular imperative, and the reason why we must apply ourselves to the task, deploying reason, skill, and penetrating wisdom, as Geshe-Doga says, as a mean to protect others from the negative mind of losing faith or criticizing a bodhisattva needs to ensure that they're engaging in the means and conduct of making others happy. So I might conclude the presentation here for today. I have a lot more to say about the next couple of verses, but I'm particularly going to take the opportunity of delving more thoroughly or deeply into the issues surrounding what it means to view myself as an apparition, and how that might support our practice. So I'm going to be focusing on that with some care, particularly at the beginning of the next session, because I'm conscious that we're not tackling the famous chapter 9 this point in time, which is an elaborate presentation of the wisdom topic. So Shantideva's, what's the word for it? Seeding the topic throughout various verses in the various chapters that then culminate in the elaborate presentation. But the point is that we can't not look at it, as for all the reasons I laid out at the beginning of the session. So I'd like to throw it open to discussion and comments.
I was curious, Ross.
Sorry, I can't hear who's speaking.
Oh.
Chosan.
Can you hear me? It's Shayla.
Sheila. Yeah, I can. Thank you. Yeah.
I was curious about the use of the word shame. I don't think I've ever heard that word before in Buddhist texts. So that I thought that was rather interesting.
Yes, it's I think another word for it is conscience. Conscience, having a conscience, having a moral apparatus at play. It's not sort of saying, oh, I'm going to beat myself over the head and punish myself with a stick for being bad. It's saying that I'm going to take responsibility for maintaining my ethical practice in a clear, responsible, consistent fashion. And I feel disappointed when I fail to do so, because I've let not just myself down, but all other beings from a bodhisattva's perspective, or tending bodhisattva's perspective, because I'm going to go off the rails if I don't feel shame. But shame is also there as an integral component of not acting in a negative way. If we have a sense of shame that's been carefully developed through our meditational awareness, for example, we'll know to be cautious when those situations arise. It's not to say we necessarily feel shame on those moments, but we know what's at stake. So shame is a valuable emotional response from this perspective. It's not a kind of self-flagellating shame or a despondency or a self-denigration again. It's something much more powerful and much more valuable than that. So it's really trying to overcome a discrepancy between what we're saying we're doing and what we're actually doing. If there's a gap, we should feel shame in the sense that we're letting our practice down, we're letting others down. Does that help? Yeah.
Yes.
Does anyone else have anything to offer? Yeah.
Yes.
Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Ross. Yeah, Shayla, I've heard it glossed as self-respect, right?
There you go.
No, you have a certain self-image of who you are and the standards for yourself. So that's kind of acts as a way of, stopping those negative behaviors.
Yes, I think it's we're so let's say imbricated. We're so twisted up into the emotional mess of things that some of these terms that we come upon, as you point out very helpfully, get caught up in that kind of pathological psychology framework. We need to rescue them as coherent, lucid, spiritual devices of great potency and value, and not let this overlay of kind of inherited ideology hang on those terms. We have the same thing in, I noticed Batchelor's earlier translations of Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life use the word sin, and he got into a lot of trouble with that from others, because they said it's importing a kind of Christianic flavor to what isn't actually intended to be that way at all. So we, in Buddhism in general, not just in relation to this, we have to be so careful to look at our terminology, and that's why I often take time out to do that, because it's not being pedantic, although it might appear so. It's because unless we have a precise understanding of our use of the terms, we won't know what we're talking about. And this is one of the great powers of debate, and something that we do miss out on at the moment in our Western reception of the Nalanda tradition. Unless we're debating, we're not testing the boundaries of our meanings of our terms. And therefore, we think we're having a conversation, but we're actually shooting past each other into the distance without understanding that even that's occurring. And often when we sharply define our terms, we discover ourselves running up against misconceptions that we've had, because they've been the baggage of that term that we've been responding to rather than the actual term itself. And so these issues are going to become, or are, particularly poignant when we come to the wisdom topic, because it's complicated by the fact that each of the systems of tenets, the main sort of presentations of how things exist, use a common vocabulary, but to very different purposes. What they're meaning by self, what they're meaning by imputing, etc., can be vastly different. And so unless we get to the bottom of what that system is meaning by that term, we can't actually have a debate with them, and they can't debate with us. So it's not pedantic. I think sometimes students get lumped into the scholastic basket because they do take care in this way, but I don't see it as academic or scholastic. I think it is cognitively responsible behavior to take that care with our terminology. Yeah. I had one of my lecturers, Professor Elizabeth Gross. She is a famous feminist theorist, and she was quoting a lot of Western philosophy in her classes. It was a philosophy class, and at one point someone objected to her use of specific philosophical terminology, and I think she was talking about ontological reality at some point. The word ontological has a huge history in Western philosophical and religious philosophical thought. It can't just be lifted up and transplanted immediately without looking at that. But anyway, she was attacked by one of the students, and she said, well, take it this way. If I was a brain surgeon and I didn't know precisely the names and the purposes of particular parts of your brain, you would not want me to do surgery on you. So I don't understand the language of a brain surgeon when they're talking about the human brain. So don't expect someone who's deeply involved in a study of Buddhism, for example, to be immediately accessible for someone who hasn't done that sort of study. It's not because there's an inherent complexity in Buddhism. It's just that we have to view it in this way. We have to rise to the challenge. So it's very exciting to look at definitions, and many of the great texts spend chapters on unraveling the definitions of 3 or 4 terms in the first stanza of one of the great texts, as we know. What is the meaning of great compassion, for example, in Chandrakirti's text? That is a topic of great debate and discussion for many, many months in the monastic system. And there's a reason for that. Yeah. I do know other traditions like analytical philosophers and scholars in other studies, Talmudic scholars and so forth, do also go into incredible precision and detail in these matters, Jesuits and so forth. So they're not unique activities at all. Stephen.
Oh, thanks, Ross. I had a question, and I'm going to I can't recollect exactly how you said it because I wasn't understanding at the time. This is back towards the beginning of the lesson tonight. And if I'm not ringing any bells, that's okay. Someone else can say something. But you were giving divisions of the afflictions. And this was the second division into two, where you had grosser afflictions and more subtle afflictions. And then the second division of more subtle, it was conjoined with ignorance. And I wondered, is that enough for you to to find and repeat what you said?
Yes, I'm just trying to, was it a quote from His Holiness? I'll just see if I can find it
Yeah.
here.
I'm sorry, that was
It's
terribly vague.
it's actually a really yeah, here we are. It's a topic of great debate, by the way. So some people we wonder if we look at the evolution of the afflictions from innate self-grasping ignorance. When we get to the time of inappropriate attention, which kicks in dependence on grasping at something as inherent existent, what is the role of self-grasping at that moment? Is it running alongside in an adjunct way with the exaggerating mind, or is it an actual integral aspect of the exaggerating mind itself at that moment? And so there's a kind of debate here, a very subtle debate. So I'll read the passage again. The generally accepted understanding of afflictions is that they possess distinct focus, distinct objects of focus, and disturb the minds in distinct ways. Attachment, for example, exaggerates positive qualities, while aversion exaggerates negative. In the Prasangika, however, all afflictions involve, in their mode of apprehension, an element of grasping at inherent existence. So we're looking at here, what is that element? How does that element function? Where does it function? Across what does it function? Whether attachment, aversion, pride, or some other mental state, what makes them afflictions is not their distinct character, but this common denominator of grasping at self-existence when apprehending its objects. So this is, in brief, he says, the gross level of afflictions arises from having delusion grasping at inherent existence as its cause. So that's that sort of unraveling of the cycle. While the subtle level of afflictions arises when a mental state is conjoined with the delusion grasping at true existence. So it's running along with it in a contemporaneous sense, rather than coming simply from it in a causal sense. And so there are debates about how this works. And they're very, very fascinating debates. And it is, I'll find the passage for next week. There's an elaborate couple of pages in Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha nature, which tackles this exact point in some detail. So it's a very rare topic to come upon in our Western translated literature at the moment. It's one of the areas where, as time goes on, we're going to have more access to those discussions. Does that help?
It certainly does, because I think I understood it a little better having heard it the second time. But it's kind of, it's a really sort of engaging debate, is self-grasping actually active alongside or as part of the afflictions? And, I
Well,
just wonder, so I make an analogy between, the mind of bodhicitta, the
mhm,
primary mind. So its whole direction is other cherishing.
mm,
And to me, that implies that our ordinary, regular, everyday mind that I have and that many other people have is an internally or inwardly focused mind. So a
mhm,
self-grasping mind. That's the primary quality of it.
mhm,
So all other mental factors would arise conjoined with self-grasping and self-cherishing. That would be
mhm.
kind of my view of it.
Yeah,
So they would all be colored because that's the quality or nature of the primary mind. So they would, all of the
yes,
mental factors would have the same similarity with that primary mind. It
yeah.
would be interesting to discuss, but
So I think it's got more to do with the grasping inherent existence flavors the process of elaboration of inappropriate qualities. But how does it do that? Does it do it itself by engaging in an elaboration which is with inherent existence? Or is it laying those qualities on top of something which has already been established as inherently existent by innate self-grasping?
well, all appearances, according to the Prasangika, all appearances outside of meditative equipoise do have that element of inherent existence.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And then I guess what I'm just sort of working out in my mind is the primary mind of an ordinary being, looking at one of these, inherently existent appearances, will also bring along with it its own self-grasping,
Mm-hmm.
because that is the nature of that primary mind.
Mm. Yeah, well, that's true. That's why it's so hard to cut through. Yeah. These are fascinating topics, and they will come up um, in very interesting ways. So I'll definitely follow up for you. Vincent Choosing, yeah.
And I'll come down to the absolute bottom layer of all of that discussion that's very heady for me. When faced with afflictions, my own and someone else's, at a
Yeah.
level where I'm at, I'm just trying to not grasp, but really embody the skill of keeping my mouth shut and at least not creating more negativity in the situation, and just let that person or the situation just spin its tires, and drain out. But
Mm-hmm.
it's so painful. It's really, it's not painful to keep my mouth shut. It's painful to, like, sometimes I'm like a deer in the headlights. And there's a part of me that's consciously choosing, don't even go there, don't respond. And there's another part of me that's just stuck, just kind of stuck. And is it appropriate then to just walk away? I want to be able to respond in some way so that I don't keep getting the stuff. I don't want to be mean about it. I don't want to blame or whatever, but I don't want the engagement. And sometimes it is because this person's going crazy. And obviously because they're very unhappy or jealous or just angry or whatever. But also from my own side, I don't want to be the garbage dump. So I'm like a deer in the headlights. So any ideas, folks?
Well, there's lots of, I mean, you're raising lots of interesting and very real issues there, and very open, honest feelings as well, which is really important to be in touch with that. I think it's all of those things, and you have to nuance your response according to the actual situation. There isn't a blanket answer to these things. We need a repertoire or an armory of tools. That's what Shantideva was talking about too. We pull on, take this one or this one or this one, depending on circumstance, because it's going to be the most effective. And this is already meant by understanding the techniques, by studying them. We need to know what it is they do. So Shantideva gave us the bottom line last week. We said to simply become a block of wood, become a tree trunk, don't move at all. That was a bottom line, and a very profound one, because it gives us time. We use the word regroup, don't we, in Western psychology? It gives us time to regroup, to gather our better self again and work out how we could respond. But if we don't allow ourselves that space, that respite, that moment of restraint, that inactivity, we're in danger of flying over the edge of Niagara Falls and breaking everything apart when we hit the bottom. We can't stop once we're in free flight there. And so this is one of the great skills. And so when I'm very challenged, the block of wood thing is about all I can manage to muster at that moment, because of my lack of other spiritual techniques. But it works. That one will work in that way. It's incredible. And so I might then decide, look, this is too much. I'm going to walk away. But I'm going to walk away well. I'm not going to slam the door while spitting at someone or throwing something at someone. I'm going to try to leave politely, as Shantideva was suggesting that in that beautiful verse. There's a decorum here. Just saying, look, I can't accept what you're saying at the moment. It's incredibly challenging, but I respect that you're bothering to say it to me. It would let me just walk away and have a think about it, and we can discuss it later. So that's equivalent to being a block of wood, because we haven't had to respond in detail. We've let ourselves off the hook, but we haven't forfeited or abandoned the issue. So we're going to go away and think about it, or discuss it with our friends, whatever we need to do in order to come back and handle it differently the next day. But my experience of these things is that the next day is always very different, because that person has often gone away and done exactly the same thing. So you both come in at a different threshold after that heated moment, if it is a heated moment, for example. Heated moments are the worst times to try to have any discussion about anything, because as we all know, terrible things go wrong, and terrible things are said when we're really upset. So these are really honest and important issues. So if we find ourselves getting hard and cold and resentful when we're trying not to respond, then that is a sign that our view of that person is being powerfully coloured by our rejection of them, because it's making us feel uncomfortable. And that coldness is, from an ethical stance, a dangerous situation, because we're not going to be able to feel for that person, and therefore we'll have no qualms in hurting them or rejecting them. So in a way, we take a step back within ourselves in that moment, and we try to work out whether we're feeling calm and relaxed and open and loving, or actually feeling really bitter, twisted and hurt. And then on the basis of identifying what's happening here, we then work out what it is we can do in that situation. So we have to become sensitive, as you say, to that emotional experience, not just glaze over the top of it and pretend it's not there. Yeah. Has anyone else got advice? Because this is not a unique experience, is it? It's a very frequent one. And Shantideva had, in one of his verses recently, we were talking about the impatience of not getting what we thought we should have immediately. this, you know, this feeling of immediate, I deserve to have that immediately, not later, so that anything that comes in the road of me getting that thing immediately becomes an object of hostility or resentment. This is an extraordinary scenario. And I've cited the example in my own experience of that happening in a shopping queue, for example, waiting to buy a ticket. So if we can remain calm and relaxed in those situations, then we're able to navigate them in a very skillful way. So calmness and peaceful. Shantideva talked about peacefulness there as a spiritual remedy. It's very important what he means there. It means we just let things settle, allow ourselves to relax. We don't have to solve the riddle of the universe in that moment. We just have to get through the next minute as best we can. Yeah. It's almost like we sit on our cushion and then come to all sorts of commitments and realizations, and then we have to go out and into the marketplace to test whether what we've done on the cushion is working or not, and then go back to the cushion again. There's that lovely dialogue between the cushion and the world. We have to keep seeing both of those things as equally vital to our responsible spiritual practice and development. Yeah. Well, we might conclude there. So thank you very much for your participation. And I realise that some of those wisdom topics are incredibly challenging, but I'm trying to create a kind of framework in which we see the necessity of the degree of difficulty, if you like. That of course it's difficult, but don't dismiss its importance. So nibble away. We nibble away. And Geshe Rabton had a beautiful analogy. He said, in terms of thought transformation, he said, if you push the corner of the table turns. So we just need, it's a very Zen-like statement, but a very profound one. We're not going to get it at once, but if we can get one tiny little aspect of it, it begins to create a crevice in the doorway. And that's why Aryadeva in his 400 says that even to doubt that things exist inherently as they appear to do is to shatter the foundations of samsara. The doubt alone, this niggling feeling that perhaps things don't exist in the way that I presume they do, is already a powerful step towards generating a wisdom realizing emptiness. So we shouldn't underestimate that. So thank you very much. And Lou will hand over to the dedication prayers and to really give away any benefits of our time together for the benefit of all.
For as long as space endures, and as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings without the soul, which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, to whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase forevermore. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish granting was fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends, until psychic existence is ended. Fearless teacher, an assembly of children, victorious ones, Shravakas, partake of Buddha's victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. And holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings to explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth are the blessings of the oceans of three jewels, and great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, the smile of a new reincarnation, swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. My mouse is broken. I'm trying to use the pad, the mouse pad.
Oh dear, you've done
And
wonderfully. Thank you, Lou.
I don't know what I'm doing.
No, but it worked splendidly well. So thank you for your efforts there. You did disappear at one stage in the beginning, but we took that in our stride.
Okay.
You reappeared, so we were happy. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Have a good week. Bye-bye.